Welcome to the very first episode of Everything Self-Defense, where we talk about everything tactical, everything practical, and of course, everything self-defense. I'm your host, Nik Farooqui from Ballistic Fighting Methods and StreetSafe101.com, and for today's topic, we are discussing the truth about self-defense. We're going to be talking about a few different aspects about self-defense, everything from the mindset, levels of violence, and even the use of firearms in self-defense, along with some other fun stuff. It's an important topic because it will help you realize what your training is, if you have any, what your objective in the training is, or should be, and simply it will tell you what you know, what you don't know, and most importantly, what you need to know. I don't want to go into XYZ tactic or ABC techniques today. I want to help you culminate your own thoughts about what it really takes to be able to protect your life or the life of a loved one. So as we begin, I want to start off by defining the term self-defense, along with a couple other terms that we commonly use in conjunction: martial arts and combat. Now, I know if I said self-defense, martial arts, and combat to you in any conversation, you will envision three completely different scenarios. As you should. They are completely different things, but they do share some common ground. In today's episode, you'll be able to compare and contrast what that common ground is. I should also tell you that I don't really care much for the term self-defense. I do use it because it is a generally understood term, but I don't like what it implies. You'll see what I mean in just a moment. Let's start off by defining these three terms. Self-defense is doing the minimum you need to do to escape the situation. You're doing just enough. It doesn't require much training, and you're relying heavily on luck. Here's why I say that. Who decides what is enough? If I hit 10 people the same way in the same place, I will still get 10 different reactions. And if you follow my philosophy of you can only beat violence with superior violence, meaning somebody's trying to harm me, I will need to impose greater harm to them in order to stop them from harming me, then they're the ones telling me what I need to do. They're telling you what's enough. And in all honesty, there's nothing defensive about it. There's nothing defensive about inflicting a greater harm to someone. So why do we say self-defense? Also, let it be known that I feel the term self-defense implies a victim mentality, a victim mindset. These are folks that may never train, or they only do a seminar or catch a YouTube video, but mostly they're just hoping that they have enough instinctually to be able to protect themselves. The second term is martial arts. Now, to me, martial arts has a punitive end, meaning somebody wins and somebody loses. Whether it be by points, knockout, submission, a judge, a referee, whatever. But ultimately, somebody wins and somebody loses. That implies a sport mindset because it's competitive in nature. Now, I know many martial arts schools will offer some kind of a quote-unquote self-defense course, but the next thing you know, you're breaking boards and accumulating a rainbow of belts, which has absolutely no functional application in real-life scenario. Or you might get involved with today's mixed martial arts, like the stuff that you see on the UFC. Now that produces amazing athletes, supremely conditioned. These guys hit hard, they're fast, they can run at an intensive pace for extended periods of time, they're aggressive, but at the end of the day, this is neither combat nor self-defense. Here's why. There's still rules, weight requirements, clothing requirements, a padded floor, lights, octagon, ring girls, timeouts, referees, 3 judges, no multiple attackers, no weaponry, and 3 months to study film to prepare for the fight. And I'm going to piss off a lot of my own friends here, especially the guys that teach this art or that art. And guys, if you're listening, I love you. I got nothing but love and respect and admiration for you. But let's face it, martial arts is not combat, period. Although there is a bleed over in material, and some martial arts will indeed teach you valuable and applicable information. But in today's McDojo society, it's becoming very few far in between. The third term, combat. Now, this is very simple to understand. My life or theirs. And it's a mindset. And that combat mindset also tells you that you have to engage without the thought of oneself. If you're going to be fighting to protect a loved one or even yourself, you'd better take you out of the equation and engage selflessly. The next thing that you have to do is take these terms and relate them to different levels of violence, or at least take violence and put it on a 1 to 10 scale, 1 being very low level, 10 being very extreme. Let me give you a couple examples. In scenario number 1, you have 2 guys that are walking down the street, they bump shoulders, one guy's having a bad day, turns around, starts dropping the F-bomb like nobody's business, and then swings on the other guy. Now this to me is very low level. It happens often, but it's very low level type of violence. Both of them are going to end up going home just lumped up. Scenario number 2. What if you're a female coming out of the store at night, and as you're walking to your car, a van pulls up, 2 guys jump out, grab you, throw you in the back of the van? This is a high level of violence, and it's about to get worse because are they going to kidnap you? Are they abducting you? Are they assaulting you? Are they murdering you? Who knows? Let me give you scenario number 3. You wake up in the middle of the night, alarmed by something. You look at the clock, it's 3:30 in the morning. You're groggy, you're tired, you're not sure what's going on, but you thought you heard glass break. So you get out of bed and start walking around. You open the bedroom door, you see someone going into your 8-year-old daughter's bedroom. Now this is a very high level of violence. Priority has become life. And do you see how situation number 3 and 2 overshadow number 1? Because the violence is at completely different level. By the way, I love asking this scenario of random people. And then I ask them what they would do. And the answer that I typically get is this: I'm going to go get my 12 gauge and blow their head clean off. Nobody messes with my family. And I pat these people on the back and I say, right, I'm with you. Nobody messes with your family. But let me recap your response. You're going to turn around, go back to your room or to your safe, turn some dial or some biometric or some combination, or leave a semen sample or whatever you have to do to open that thing. Grab your gun, load up, come back down the hallway, enter the room, assess the threat, acquire the target, then pull the trigger. How long does that take? If you have your wits about you, 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes? Let's just say it takes about a minute on average. Do you know what kind of damage we can do to somebody in 1 entire minute? Let me tell you guys something. A couple weeks ago, I was teaching a tactical combat camp at my studio, and it was non-firearms related. What I did was I showed these guys how to go lethal in hand-to-hand combat or with an edged weapon. And the look of surprise that went over people's faces, how we went from 0 to kill in 3 to 5 seconds. 3 to 5 seconds. Imagine what you can do to somebody in an entire minute. Mind you that you might be shooting blindly into a physical hog pile in a low light situation. Are you accurate enough to get the bad guy and not the good guy? Which brings up the next point: using firearms for self-defense. Now, I'm a firearm advocate. I love guns, period. I feel every home should come with at least a couple shotguns, a couple carbines, and a handful of pistols, along with the training course. But there's things to consider. And one of the things that I hate the most is the false sense of security that people get just by purchasing a firearm. They don't get any proper training. And by the way, standing on a target line, sending brass downrange and pushing hole in paper is not shooting. That is learning how to operate the firearm. Shooting will introduce stressful factors, meaning there's a shot clock or movement or multiple targets or barricades or clearing rooms or some kind of surprise element. That's shooting. Standing at a line, taking your sweet time, making sure you have a good sight picture, sight alignment, trigger squeeze, breath control, all these things, that is learning how to operate the firearm. And it's needed as well. But when people purchase a firearm and they get this false sense of security, and then they tell me that they have the cure-all answer. If I turn around and say, what would you do in this situation? I got a gun. How about that situation? I got a gun. How about this situation? I got a gun. Nothing is farther from the truth. That is not a cure-all answer for every single problem. Let's take a look at firearms in self-defense. Go back to the scenario that we used earlier with the two guys who bumped shoulders and the one guy who swung on the other guy. Imagine if the guy who got swung on stepped back, drew his pistol, and lit that SOB up. Guess what? He's the guy that's at fault. The key word here is excessive. How about in situation number 2 with the guy in the van that abducted the lady coming out of the store? Do you think that she can get to her purse or her car or wherever she's hiding her pistol and get it into action fast enough? Or how about in scenario number 3, the guys who broke into your home? Sure, the castle doctrine will offer you some form of protection, hopefully. But don't forget a few things. You're responsible for everything that comes out of that gun. Secondly, is that there might be an engagement going on as is. Are you prepared to pull the trigger and not hit an innocent bystander? Also keep in mind that most ammunition will travel through multiple interior and exterior walls. And if you accidentally shoot that 10-year-old neighbor kid, guess who's going to jail? You are. You're responsible for each projectile that leaves the gun. I have a saying when it comes to using firearms in self-defense. You may not pay the piper, but you will always go for the ride. Which means that no matter what, there's a legal process that you have to deal with. So before you unleash that hand cannon, you'd better accept the fact that you might be going to jail for a very long time. And with so much anti-gun media going on these days, you'd also better believe that the prosecution side is going to make a complete martyr out of you. Ultimately, having a firearm is like having any other tool in the toolbox. It has a purpose, a place. You have to learn how to use that tool. But you don't go painting with a hammer. You need to have other tools in that toolbox. And you need to ask yourself, what level of violence on that 1 to 10 scale do you feel comfortable employing that firearm? Because you're not going to have a second chance. And what scenario relates to that level of violence? Meaning, if you said, I'm okay with using the gun from a 7, 8, 9, or a 10, well, what makes a 7 a 7? What kind of situation would that be? Or a 10? And you should do this because it's a subjective matter. What I consider a low level of violence might be a very high level of violence for somebody else. Maybe you're an ex-military special operations guy, and my idea of high violence is barely worth breaking a sweat for you. So you have to decide that for yourself. But what I can tell you is that the more I've trained and delved into greater and greater violence, the more my views changed. What I once thought was a high level of violence is now barely a medium or a low level of violence. And the level of violence will dictate the level of response. When I talk to groups about this particular subject, levels of response, I show them how I've broken this down into 4 main categories. Let me share that with you. Level 1 is what I call terminate, meaning I've left no choice but to take life. There was simply no other option for me. My tactics have to be lethal all the way. Level 2 is what I call strike. This is still a high level of response. I'm looking to do severe damage quickly. Somebody is still going to go to the hospital. Level 3 is what I call control. Now, this is where most type A alpha males operate. Punching, kicking, whatever. Everybody's going home, but with a few lumps, bumps, and bruises. And finally, you have level 4, what I call escape and evade. We're leaving a lot to luck here. This is like self-defense, but we need to get the heck out of Dodge, so we're doing just enough to be able to get on the move. Now, the reason why I'm telling you this is pretty simple. It should lead you to ask yourself a question. Do you have what it takes to operate effectively and efficiently in all of 4 of those categories? Because if you do not, then you are simply unequipped for today's realm of violence, and you should do something to remedy that, period. The other end to all of this is this. If all you know how to do is operate at a level 3, but the situation requires that you act on a level 1, meaning the violence is extremely high, your response has to be extremely high. Quite simply put, your best wasn't even good enough. What are you going to do? And this takes us back to the beginning of our episode when I said in the definition of self-defense, you're leaving a lot to luck. You're doing something and hoping that it is enough. And if it's not enough, you're standing there scratching your head. Another aspect to consider in self-defense is a term that we often use called range, which refers to proximity. Range is telling you the distance between you and the aggressor, and understanding that the range will also influence the tactics you can employ. Imagine someone standing 4 to 5 feet from you. This is what I would call kickboxing range. Not kickboxing the art or sport, but kickboxing range. At this distance, you can pretty much only punch, kick, or dive in for a tackle. Mind you, I'm assuming that there's no weapons involved at this point. This is pretty much where most people are comfortable, and also where most people would imagine a fight occurring if I was to say there's a fight happening outside. The kickboxing range is pretty much a chess match. Footwork, line familiarization, timing, speed, strength, all of these things play a big role in kickboxing range. So again, you're leaving a lot to chance here, a lot to luck. Let me talk to you about my preferred range. We call it close quarters. Ooh, close quarters. Sounds very military-esque, but it's really not. Now, I know all of those acronyms like CQA, CQB, CQC, CQDT, or whatever the hot flavor of the month is, and it sounds very tactical. But what do they really mean? Well, anything CQ refers to a particular range called close quarters. The fundamentals of close quarters are pretty simple. Number 1, it puts you in a place where you can be purely offensive. Number 2, gives you leverage over the aggressor despite their physical attributes. And number 3, close quarter requires rapid and aggressive action immediately in order to achieve a point of dominance. Let me recap. Close quarter puts you in a place to be purely offensive. It gives you leverage over the aggressor despite their physical attributes. And it requires rapid and aggressive action immediately in order to achieve a point of dominance. Close quarters with a firearm is considered about 21 feet. By the way, Do you know why or how that 21-foot rule came about? It comes from something called the Tuller drill, or the Dan Inosanto knife drill. Let me give you a little bit of history on the Tuller drill. A gentleman named Dan Inosanto was working with the Chicago Police Department in the early 80s. They set up a mock room and sent police officers into this room on a domestic call or whatever. Dan Inosanto was inside this room, hiding an edged weapon, but standing in plain sight. When the police officer approached him, he would make a beeline to him, bull rush him, and pull the blade. It was on average 21 feet that Dan Inosanto was able to slice and dice the police officer before the police officer could even take the weapon out of his holster. And this happened over and over and over. And you can YouTube a video of this. Just do a search for Dan Inosanto knife drill. In hand-to-hand, close quarter is less than 24 inches. It's a place that speed, strength, height, weight, whatever, they don't matter as much. And you can be offensive with all parts of your body, including the elbows, knees, the bicep, the shoulder. You can choke, you can break necks, you can eye gouge, you can bite, you can do whatever you know how to do. And ladies, guess where you're going to be if you ever get attacked? If somebody comes up behind you, throws you to the floor, climbs all over you in order to assault you, that's considered close quarter. So as we're moving along, are you finding yourself realizing that the term self-defense is actually more like combat? And I know the term combat sounds very aggressive and very military-esque, but doesn't it seem a little bit more appropriate for what we're looking for? Let me ask you another question. What kind of game plan do you have? You really need to have a game plan. But in order to have a game plan that's effective, you need to really delve into the realities of the situation and understand the things like levels of violence, levels of response, proximity and range, weaponry, amongst other things. And also understand that you need to train yourself for the absolute worst possibility and develop a usable skill set that is so dynamic that you can respond appropriately to all scenarios. I'd like to give you guys one more thing to think about. Awareness. Awareness is the key to success in majority of the situations. Being aware of your environment, being aware of yourself, being aware of any suspect behavior happening around you. I always tell people this. Criminals are very much like electricity. They're constantly seeking the path of least resistance. That means if you're coming out of the mall, you're fumbling around with your keys, you're holding on to bags, you got a telephone strapped to your shoulder, you're making a pretty good victim. But if you come out and prepared and you're making eye contact with anybody that's coming close or making an approach towards you, the odds are that they will probably move on to somebody else. They do not want the struggle. Because even criminals don't want to get caught. To be aware of yourself, you need to stress yourself in your training to really be keen to what happens to yourself physiologically, mentally, emotionally. That stress has to be there. And you also have to be aware of the standard behaviors and knowing how to read them when somebody is approaching you with ill intent. And that's going to take us into a completely different episode, but keep an eye open for that. We're going to be talking about those types of behaviors and how to read them and what to do about them. So in conclusion, as we're closing up the show here, I want to ask you guys, what's the real truth about self-defense? Well, to me, the term self-defense doesn't really exist. It doesn't imply the right thing. My life is more developed around combat because if I'm going to engage, I'm going to engage for my life. I'm not interested in getting into a ring or an octagon or anything else. And I also know that I need to have the skill set to be able to go from 0 to 10, okay? To go from low level to high level of violence at will. Because you simply just don't know what's going to happen, when, and where. And if you've prepared and nothing ever happens, then you've really lost nothing. But if you don't prepare and something bad does happen, you've lost everything. I hope that today's show has given you an insight on the truth about self-defense. At the very least, I hope it's culminated some thought, helped you look at the realities of the world, helped given you an education on what kind of things to consider. And before we leave, I'd like to just thank a couple people. First and foremost, I want to thank the ISRA, that stands for the Illinois State Rifle Association. The ISRA has supported me in all of my events. They've had me out several times to come speak at their grassroots meetings. But mostly, these guys are down in Springfield fighting for our gun rights every single day. So if you're not a part of the ISRA and you're an Illinois resident, make sure you check them out. And I'd also like to thank a dear friend of mine, David Lombardo. David Lombardo is the founder and chief instructor of a company called Safer USA, based out of the Chicagoland. They teach firearm safety, NRA courses, and even tactical courses. David also has a show that plays on Chicago's AM 560 WIND on Sunday nights at 9 p.m. Central Time. You can also podcast it. The show is called On Target Radio. Dave, thanks for your support through and through, man. In the meanwhile, I'm your host, Nik Farooqui. Make sure you guys check out the next episode. We're going to be talking about weaponry in self-defense. If you guys enjoyed today's show, make sure you check out Facebook at Street Safe 101. You can also check us out online at www.streetsafe101.com. I'm your host, Nik Farooqui from Ballistic Fighting Methods and StreetSafe101.com. Be safe, be well, and we'll catch you on the next episode.